The galaxy did not simply forget Earth. It filed us under a cautionary footnote and moved on. Old charts stamped SOL with a yellow triangle, dormant, no contact. That was the point. We made sure the triangle stayed there. Dr. Mai Nguyen climbed down the last ladder into a cathedral of light carved in granite under Mount Washington. Crystal ribs hummed like quiet instruments. At the center lay Commander Naomi Reyes, eyes closed, chest rising and falling after 8 centuries. Around her, machines older than history kept steady time. Humanity had found their maker's ruins in vacuum and characteristically asked one question: what can this do if we use it responsibly? Naomi volunteered to find out when Earth chose silence over empire. Mai checked the slate. "Still asleep, Commander," she whispered. "Kids are in school. The coastal farms got rain. It was the ritual. Report the ordinary so the extraordinary would not swallow you." Far above New England, a flotilla slid from fold space, sleek blue hulls against black. The Vyerk's Dominion considered themselves first among the 7 paths. The rest of the Concorde called them useful and dangerous. Admiral Reth Khazar paced the bridge of the dreadnought Crown of Laconia, 5 miles long and unpleasantly confident. "Dead system, fast salvage," he said. "Begin scans. At the edges of our sky, rocks woke." Lagrange lanterns shed regolith and turned from rubble to geometry, tracking heat like owls. The ripple ran inward. Relay moles near Jupiter's Trojans, sentry buoys in Saturn's rings, a telescope at Neptune blinking open like a veteran remembering. In the crystal hall, Naomi moved a finger. The floor sang. Sigils flickered around her. First maker math mapped onto human nerves. The human brain should not hold a topology like that and stay human. Naomi had wagered herself that it could. Her heart rate rose. She began to dream the system. Unfamiliar mass violating familiar lanes, the Vyerk's tight beam dripping contempt, primitive world bring nets. And below, 10,000 ordinary lives steady as bedrock. A teacher in New Mexico explaining why Washington stepped down after 2 terms. A mechanic in Lagos tuning a tractor. A ranger in Montana checking a trailhead. The world as a promise, not a performance. Mai keyed the emergency liturgy. Not all our systems were alien. Many were deliberately human, redundant, legible, fixable by hands with grease under the nails. 1,000 mountain facilities answered. On coastal shelves, tide generators rolled aside to reveal heat sinks under the Baltic. A cold grid turned warm. At L4 and L5, ringworks pivoted 1 precise degree. "Commander," Mai said, voice steadier than her pulse, "you're needed." Naomi's eyes opened. Brown, yes, but banded now with quicksilver. Dust leapt from beams at her first breath. She sat up as if the table had been waiting 800 years to finish the motion. How long? 803 years, 5 months, 9 days. "Is the compact intact?" Naomi asked. Americans have odd words for simple ideas. Compact meant consent, restraint, the promise we built our republic on before we rebuilt our world around it. "Votes still matter," Mai said. "People argue before they obey." "Good." Naomi closed her eyes and reached. The room dimmed as power flowed into pattern. The guardian lattice woke, not a throne, not a crown. A seat belt. The mountain, the ringworks, the lantern constellations, ocean mirrors, city domes disguised as weather. They answered a name spoken in courtrooms and kitchens. Quiet Atlas. It was not our fleet. It was our limit. In orbit, the Crown of Laconia dropped scouts. Cameras showed blue and green and white. No cities, no heat plumes. Dead. They dove. Things ordinary people built on ordinary budgets for ordinary reasons rose like remembered hymns. Over the prairies and over river bends and fishing lights, translucent hemispheres bloomed and drank the incoming beams. Energy vanished into math and reappeared as light in classrooms, warmth in clinics, cold in grain silos that would not spoil. Children pointed up and grinned. Parents did not run. Old men shook their heads the way you do when a long bet pays off. Admiral Khazar's 4 hands clenched. Begin planetary suppression. On his tactical board, red icons went gray as if embarrassed. Suppression failed. Naomi stood, a human frame with a weather system's patience wrapped around it. "My," she said softly, "this gets louder if you want the surface." "I was born for the echo," Mai said. Naomi lifted her hand. Across 1 billion miles, the system listened. The scouts returned scorched and confused. They had flown through cloud and silence and found people who did not panic. They had fired and watched their own fire become public utilities. On Vyerk's channels, the word for that was insult. Khazar ordered the second wave. Gunships fanned toward the continents. They aimed where empires always aim when they are unsure. At libraries, grids, bridges. Lines of light reached down. They met glass that was not glass. The light disappeared and rose elsewhere as street lamps flicking on at noon. Naomi's voice entered their hulls without a hail. It rode emergency bans the Concorde itself had mandated. "Turn away," she said. "You are trespassing in a sovereign system under compact. We will not return fire." Khazar laughed, all broken ice and pride. "You do not choose what we do in Concorde space. Then choose what you will do with mercy," Naomi said and muted herself. She looked smaller up close, Mai thought, which made the room look larger. On the wall, a map pulsed, lanterns aligned, ringworks humming, the long shadow of Saturn arcing like a patient scythe. Naomi's hands hovered over nothing. The lattice read intention. Intention was the only thing you could not forge. "Why don't we shoot something?" Mai asked, not because she wanted to, but because someone had to speak while anger was still a choice. Naomi answered with a story. "When our ancestors built a bomb, they learned a lesson. Capability and authority are different nouns. The first makers forgot that and broke themselves. We wrote it into our bones. We could end wars by making war impossible. But if we ruled to keep the peace, we would still be rulers." She glanced over. "The point, Dr. Nguyen, is to win without learning to like winning." Across the planet, small scenes backed her words. In Albuquerque, a history class paused a lesson on Washington's farewell address and watched the shield hum. In Accra, technicians pushed absorbed heat into seawater farms. In Da Nang, fishermen checked weather and decided calmly to stay out 1 more hour. The world did not hide. The world worked. The Concorde did politics. In a chamber spun of light, 7 envoys formed a circle across light years. The oldest delegate, a crystalline being named Sarat, spoke like wind through chimes. "Humans left. Some of us exhaled in relief. They were brilliant at ending fights, and brilliance has gravity." "We end fights," the Thoric general rumbled. "You ended them by breaking people," Sarat said gently. "The humans ended them by changing what people could do. That is the heavier hand." Back in the mountain, alarms traced glyphs across the air. "Third wave," Mai said. "Heavy munitions, their reputation is at stake." "Then we show them ours," Naomi said. She opened the halo wider. The lattice reached not to guns but to declarations. City courts booted protocols written like prayers. 1 million cameras pointed up and stamped time. Every intercept logged, every joule accounted for, every action recorded for whoever would argue later. Justice is a kind of shield when you build it first. The third wave broke without killing anyone. Warheads dissolved into charge, and the charge went where meters said it must. Hospitals, public works, a grid designed by engineers who believed accountability could be physical. Khazar stared at gray readouts. "They mock us," he said. He had expected panic to be a language. These primates were answering in statute and infrastructure. "Send a planet to council brief. Request authority to escalate." On the far side of the moon, something turned. It did not reveal itself, but the sunlight it threw across the sea of tranquility drew a neat new line. Mai saw it and felt her skin pebble. "What is that?" "Proof we didn't waste our exile," Naomi said, "but we don't lead with proofs that frighten children." "Children are laughing at the sky," Mai said. "Good," Naomi said. "Then we've taught well." The council argued for hours. Khazar's emergency feed played, shields blooming, people refusing to panic, exact accounting of absorbed energy. "They turn attack into utilities," one envoy said, half admiring, half afraid. Sarat dimmed. "That is what they always did, take what hurts and make it useful. They will do it to us too if we insist on being their problem." Authority arrived as it always does late. Reinforcements en route, the council's voice said. Do not engage until heavy elements arrive. Do not destroy civilians. Secure compliance. Khazar closed both mouths. Compliance was what empires called consent when they were in a hurry. He looked back at Earth. The shields remained. The laughter remained. The shame remained. Naomi stood in a room built to make power feel like duty. We give them one more chance, she said. The message went out on every legal channel. Withdraw. We will not harm you. For the first time in a very long career, Admiral Reth Khazar did not know which courage to choose, the courage to press or the courage to back away. He bought time the way soldiers do when they don't yet have orders. He maneuvered to a safe distance and waited for bigger ships. Mai exhaled. We're not shooting. They're not shooting. Is this victory? Naomi listened to the deep rhythm of engines far beyond Mars. No, she said. This is the test. Reinforcements tore a ribbon through fold space until the night looked stitched. 12,000 ships slid into a formation Khazar would never command. The Concorde sent a legend, High Admiral Telvaras, who had never lost a battle but had always fought enemies that could be counted. He opened a channel. Human Guardian, he said, because titles are cheaper than names. Submit your armaments to Concorde oversight for the safety of all. Naomi Reyes did what we built Quiet Atlas to make possible. She answered without anger. Authority comes from consent, she said. We consent to be left alone. Consent is a luxury in crises, Varas replied. In a crisis, Naomi said, luxuries show what you really believe. She cut the line. Is this where we show the moon? Mai asked. Not the whole moon. Naomi pulled the halo wide. On the night side, Mare Tranquillitatis brightened. Seam lines appeared where geology swore there were none. The shadow that had pivoted earlier opened like an iris. A ring stood revealed, slender, notched, veined with light. The archivum human-built around First Maker bones. It looked less like a weapon than a library that had learned orbital mechanics. Varas's sensor chief whispered, It's a gate. Not to elsewhere, Naomi said on the public band, but to otherwise. In the ring's throat, space thickened like glass under a lampworker's hand. Targeting solutions that crossed the threshold came out nonsense. The ring did not throw fire. It refused to count to war. Why show them that? Mai asked. Because the next thing we show would end a species' religion, Naomi said. And I want their admirals to learn we prefer verbs like refuse and decline. While the archivum rearranged math, the asteroid belt corrected posture. Stones cracked like eggshell to let city-sized platforms unfold. Their names lit on our map. Ellis, Anansi, Hildegard, Khan. Nothing glowed with menace. Even the heavy shapes looked like bridges. It was a choice. Bridges imply traffic, not conquest. The council's chamber flared again now with more voices than chairs. They have a gate, someone said, built into their moon. Sarat's facets cooled. The First Makers left bones everywhere, the old delegate said. No one wore them as lightly as humans. You say that like praise, snapped a minister who made a career promising control. It is a warning, Sarat said. They choose restraint. Choice can be revoked. Mai watched Naomi read the fleet as if it were weather. Why did we hide all this with farming and field trips? She asked. Because the republic we wanted needed boring days, Naomi said. Because children who grow up seeing only shields forget what shields are for. Because we had to prove to ourselves that power could sit in the next room and not be invited to every argument. She glanced toward a camera. We did not just build weapons, we built habits. The heavy line rolled closer, testing the archivum with probes. Each test came back the same, decline. Varas's tactical wall populated with warnings that read like legalese, access denied, jurisdiction invalid. They buried a courthouse in their sky, he said. He ordered a showpiece anyway. A super dreadnought extended a lance that had punched holes in brown dwarfs. It did not fire. It powered, which was enough. The archivum took the number the weapon tried to be and offered another. The dreadnought's capacitors went politely to sleep. On Earth, a million screens bloomed the same words, public hearing open. Naomi didn't need hearings to operate the lattice. She opened one because process is pedagogy. People tuned in from kitchens, patrol cars, subways, fields. A judge in Nairobi watched with the stillness of someone taking notes. Varas switched tactics. Guardian rays, he said on a narrowband only the heavy ships heard. What will you do if we leave today but return with a mandate tomorrow? Give you the same choice we gave ourselves, Naomi said, and hope you love your children enough to refuse yourselves. He was quiet a beat too long. That was when my noticed tremors on a line far beyond the outer planets. Naomi. I see it, Naomi said. To the fleet she added, your admirals should decide now. I will not speak again until you have chosen. She stepped back from the halo. The room felt cold without her voice. What is it? Mai asked. Something that recognizes first maker harmonics, Naomi said. From outside the map. Coming here. Everything comes here eventually, Naomi said. But let's finish this conversation first. Varas conferred with Khazar, then with the council, then with the algebra of his own conscience. He had been trained to respect power and fear chaos. What he saw was orderly and terrifying, a planet that had put a courthouse in its sky and taught its children why. Stand down, he ordered, voice like a blade sheathed. We will withdraw to a safe distance and await instruction. Naomi inclined her head, an old gesture that means both thank you and noted. The archivum folded its iris to a thinner ring. Shadows returned to tranquility. Varas kept his ships at the edge of Mars' orbit and waited for the Council's paper to catch up to reality. Paper is slower than engines. Meanwhile, smaller captains did what smaller captains do. They tried to make a name out of impatience. A cruiser flicked a beam at a lantern. A frigate launched a probe harder than polite. A corvette edged toward the night side, curious. Naomi did not flare or shout. She breathed, and the lattice breathed with her. 30 seconds, she said, only to the room like a teacher counting down to a bell. At second one, every Concorde ship saw the same banner roll down its controls in the crew's own languages. Your weapons are offline. At second 2, your engines are safe. At second 3, your shields are safe. Safe was not a taunt. It was a promise backed by math. We had written safeties into the same band the Concorde used for evacuation alerts, for collision avoidance, for search and rescue. A civilization's best habits could carry more than fear if you trusted them. By second 10, seasoned gunnery chiefs were already taking their hands off triggers. By second 15, engineers stared at power that had decided to nap while staying warm. By second 20, captains were inventorying pride and finding a deficit. At second 30, the banner disappeared. No hulls vented, no bridges burned. Gravity remained where gravity should be. Every ship's log stamped a new line. You are unharmed by the grace of quiet Atlas. Varas did not kneel. He did, however, sit. Guardian rays, he said, and the words were not a concession so much as a posture. We acknowledge capacity. What do you want? Naomi answered without ornament. For you to leave us as we left you, for you to return home and tell your children that our power is under law and our law begins with consent. She paused, and for you to remember that restraint is not weakness but a decision with a cost. What cost? Mai asked softly. Naomi didn't turn. Becoming the thing that can do this and choosing not to do more, she said. Holding the door instead of walking through it. Knowing you could fix other people's politics with a lever and refusing the lever. Varas exhaled. He was a good admiral in the old sense. He could recognize a better doctrine when it beat him without drawing blood. Concorde Fleet, he said, opening all circuits. We are departing Sol under flag of non-engagement. Log and transmit, no losses, full disablement without harm, superiority acknowledged. The last phrase tasted like iron, but it left his mouths clean. Across Earth, the public hearing ticker closed. Kids returned to math, nurses to rounds. On shop floors and in courtrooms, people wrote the same line, power can be audited. Mai sagged against a rail. We did it, she said, and then because she was scientist enough to fear relief, for now. For now, Naomi agreed. Her eyes slid sideways as if something outside the wall had leaned closer. The outer tremor? Mai asked. Closer, Naomi said. She widened a private window and let Mai see. Out beyond the Uit halo, space wrinkled like cloth tugged by an old hand. The instruments did not have a label for the rhythm, but the lattice did. It was the beat of tools with the same accent as the first makers, not cousins, not friends, familiar the way a scar is familiar. Does the council see this? Mai asked. If they do, they'll call it rumor until it touches someone's ship, Naomi said. That's why we built ears out past rumor. Above the blue planet, Concord ships pivoted, tidy as schooling fish now that there was nothing to prove. Khazar's dreadnought passed last. He sent no message. He didn't need to. The way he kept his eyes on the moon ring said enough. Fear with the beginning of respect is a better seed than fear alone. Vara's cut a final narrow band. If what you hinted is real, he said, and if we had been the storm at your door while another storm walked up your driveway, you would have been forgiven for leaving, Naomi said, and asked to help next time. Next time? Vara's repeated. Next time, Naomi said, there may not be a choice to decline. The channel closed, the great formation shrank toward the fold and stitched itself out of sight. Mai looked at the halo's dim glow. I keep thinking of your word for this, she said. Seat belt. Naomi touched the crystal table, fond as you touch a guardrail you installed yourself. Seatbelts don't make roads safe, she said. They make us honest about speed. She rubbed a thumb over a seam in the crystal. We promised ourselves when we went quiet that if we ever woke, we would wake as citizens first. Can we keep that promise? Naomi watched the far window where the wrinkle in the dark had become a bruise. Ask me in 6 months, she said. Better yet, tell me. Mai squared her shoulders the way her grandmother did when a storm stacked over the Gulf. Then I'm staying, she said. I know, Naomi answered, and smiled in a way that made 8 centuries feel like a pause in a conversation. In the map's corner, the bruise pulsed again. Instruments learned a new word for it and wrote it in tiny letters along the edge. Harvest. The lattice filed the word where serious words go under duty above fear. Naomi Reyes lifted her hand one more time and set the system to watch without blinking. Class dismissed, she said to no one and to everyone. Study hall begins. The fleet withdrew and left a silence that wasn't empty. It was the kind of silence you get after a bell, pencils out, notebooks open, the room waiting for the lesson that matters. Mai stood beside Naomi in the mountain hall and watched the map breathe. The bruise at the rim pulsed once every few minutes like a heartbeat too far for sound. Inside the rim, messages began to fall like snow. Farmers wrote to their councils, we can work nights if the grid needs us. Teachers asked for new primers, explain what restraint is, not just what it isn't. Mayors asked where to set up public counters so neighbors could see the ledgers that had turned enemy fire into light. The Republic moved the way good machinery moves, slow at first, then with a steadiness that calms the hand. Naomi opened regional channels. No conscription, she said. No secret lists. We learned our lesson. When power hides, it grows teeth. We will publish roles, publish rotations, publish outcomes. She didn't raise her voice. She raised procedures. People signed the paper that matters time. In Houston and Hanoi, machinists pulled old fixtures from back rooms and tuned them until they sang. In Mombasa and Marseille, shipfitters walked into daylight plants and went underground, into halls that had never needed to be revealed until now. Mai watched a class of 10-year-olds in Phoenix hold a hearing around a plastic table. They took turns being the council and the captain. They argued about why the archivum shouldn't be a weapon even though it could be. When the bell rang, they stacked their chairs and one kid said, "My mom says losing on purpose can be winning." The teacher smiled like someone who had just gotten a grant. The Shadow Collective did not smile. On the far side of the mapped sky, small fleets began to lean towards Saul. They were not tidy. They were made of grudges lashed to engines. Their admiral was a woman with a scar that bent her mouth toward bitterness, Vex Thura. She had lived on the outside of Concord law for long enough to know what law did to people it failed. She looked at Earth and saw not a fortress but a mirror aimed at her, and mirrors are cruel to those who have learned to flinch. She spoke on pirate bands. They will cage the galaxy with politeness. She showed clips of shields drinking fire and of children laughing under domes. They will make you grateful for your chains. Her allies nodded because fear wears any uniform you hand it. Will they target the emergency bands? Mai asked, watching noise climb across the spectrum. Yes, Naomi said. They will try to lie in the voice of rescue. She pulled up a cabinet that looked like a courthouse index. We built for that. Quiet Atlas had not only shields and ringworks, it had witness. 1 billion personal devices could attune to a public proof, cryptographic signatures woven into the same frequencies used for storms and fires and lost hikers. Every message that claimed urgency had to pass through civic hands. In the next hour, the Shadow broadcast 3 false panics. All 3 died under a pile of citizen countersigns that said, "We saw, we heard, this is not real." They'll try something with mass next, Naomi said. Rocks don't ask permission. She was right. The collective's first physical move wasn't glory. It was gravel, thousands of seeded boulders loaded into transfer orbits timed to look like a stutter in the meteor streams. If they land inside a shielded dome, Mai said, the dome will eat the fire if they land outside. We get craters that look like negligence, Naomi finished. And they will cut those images into every speech. She reached with the calm of a paramedic. The lattice slipped a glove over the magnetosphere. Quiet Atlas nudged the solar wind the way a hand cups a flame. The sky rippled. The meteor pattern slurred. Half the rocks burned early. The rest broke apart into dust that became sunsets. Vexthura watched the color bloom over continents and tasted bile. They will make even our anger beautiful. Mai felt the bruise in the dark again. It had deepened. How long until the thing that isn't a fleet becomes a fleet? Soon enough to make this argument stupid, Naomi said, but we still have to make it. The archivum turned a degree. It did not bear guns, it opened pages. Publishing, Naomi said, and the word went out like an old friend. We posted everything, the intercept logs, heat ledgers, power diffs, audit trails. We posted the names of people who had signed up for midnights at pump stations. We posted the ballots that had approved the Quiet Atlas Charter 8 centuries ago, signatures faded and legible. This is not theater, Naomi said to the world. This is homework. The collective sent their first officers anyway, not ships people. Quiet Atlas let them in and took their guns and gave them translators and water. Vexthura's second stood in a room in Nairobi and stared at a wall of ledgers. You publish everything, he said. It was not accusation, it was all sliding out sideways. We publish enough that lying is uphill, the clerk said. It doesn't stop evil, it tires it out. When the envoys returned, Vexthura did not change her mind. But some of her captains did what captains do when the central voice is more anger than plan. They drifted. They peeled off toward worlds where the thing at the rim would not matter. They muttered about waiting to see and about keeping fuel dry. Vexthura counted again and found her 50,000 had become 37. Mai leaned on the rail. Publishing made them tired, she said. Publishing made them choose in daylight, Naomi said. That's the only kind of choosing that cures. On the map, the bruise pulsed. Naomi touched the table. Quiet Atlas answered with a hum that felt like a seatbelt clicked home. Study hall is almost over, Naomi said. The test will be open book. The first shadow flotillas arrived ragged and hungry. They did not tender hails. They cut toward the belts where our platforms had names that sounded like grandmothers and poets. They expected batteries and got ombuds. The ships that moved out to meet them weren't shaped like knives. They looked like courthouses with engines. What is that? A pirate gunner asked. A thing that says show your work, his captain said darkly. Ombud's ships projected fact beacons, not light you could see with a camera, but constraints you could feel in a console. Fire control nodes that lied about coordinates went soft. Systems that changed logs after the fact hardened and refused their own edits. The beacons didn't reach for triggers. They reached for humans. Every helm station got the same message in the messiest language humans own. We are watching with you. Not we are watching you. With witness as an invitation, not a threat. Some shadow ships laughed and shot anyway. The first volley folded into the archivum's iris and went elsewhere, nowhere bright, nowhere dark, just a safe box labeled later. Naomi did not gloat. She did not say, "You see," she called up corridors. "If you wish to leave," the corridors said, "leave. No pursuit, no mark on your slate." Half the pirates took the lanes. Relief looks like betrayal from certain angles. Vex Thura watched her formation thin and smiled without humor. "The ones who leave were never going to stay when it mattered," she told her bridge. "We will fight with those who refuse to be taught." She had one lesson to offer, a weapon built in a shed by thieves who understood that law runs on timing. It was ugly and precise. It targeted the common bands, the frequencies where ambulances and fire crews and rescue skiffs lived. It came wrapped in counterfeit help. When it hit, it didn't break things. It made the system argue with itself until truth looked like a choked street. Mai saw it before it landed. "Noise," she said, "in the shape of duty." "We knew this teacher," Naomi said. "We met him in our elections." Quiet Atlas moved authority down, not to the mountain, to neighborhoods. The common bands forked. 1,000 little courts spun up in places with coffee and laundry. Volunteer panels, retired dispatchers, teenage radio nerds, old medics with hands like maps, voted packets valid or false and stamped signatures the way notaries do. The counterfeit help found itself standing in doorways where grandmothers asked for ID. The noise went quiet, not because physics was elegant, but because people were. Vex Thura tried rocks again, bigger this time, wrapped with sails that bent sunlight like a grudge. The magnetosphere glove flexed. The archivum salted the trajectories with otherwise. The sunsets were beautiful. So were the live feeds from the coast guards who pulled 2 falling shards from the sky with nets of math and steel. Both crews got the same celebration from a billion screens. Not a parade, just a line on ledgers that added a bonus hour of paid leave to everyone who had stood outdoors that night and watched. On the flank, a Concorde wing blinked in, Vara's, not with dreadnoughts but with rescue. He kept his warships under strict rules and sent tugs and med boats forward. "We do not shoot in courtrooms," he told a captain with hands that wanted a fight. He hailed Naomi on a narrowband. "Our council has given me a mandate that sounds nothing like the last one. It says, assist when asked." "You're asking," Naomi said. "Help us keep witnesses alive. Permission to put our medics under your local protocols." "Granted," Naomi said, and the word meant welcome. Shadow crews who took damage found themselves tractored by ships that wore the Concorde's crest and Earth seal side by side. Their wounds were bound by nurses who stamped receipts for the supplies they used. "You're itemizing our bandages," a pirate spat. "So you can contest the bill," the nurse said, and her smile was unweaponized. Vex Thura watched accounts pile up. She had come to burn a cage and found herself inside a story about audits and amnesties. Rage is a momentum, not a plan. She aimed at the archivum and fired everything. The ring did not answer with heat. It showed her absence. For one breath, her bridge saw the world without the gate, weapons burning through atmospheres, hospitals dark, children under the open sky instead of domes that sip fire and give it back as light. When vision returned, her crew had their hands off their boards the way soldiers do at funerals. "This isn't victory," she told them. "This is theater." Mai flinched not because the insult bit, but because it grazed a truth. "Are we making a show?" "We are making records," Naomi said, "which look like shows to those who fear testimony." The shadow wavered and split. A third of Vex Thura's remaining ships took the amnesty corridors. A third drifted to the rim to watch the bruise bloom. A third tightened around their admiral, discovering what loyalty means when you start subtracting excuses. Naomi dimmed the halo. "They won't try us while the thing at the edge is walking," she said. "They'll wait to see if it breaks us." Mai looked at the Ombud's ships, at the beacons and the nets and the clouds that had turned into tools. "Is restraint enough?" she asked, "when what's coming doesn't have a conscience to shame?" "No," Naomi said. She did not apologize for the word. "But restraint tells us who we are before we pick up what we will need next." The bruise at the rim opened like an old eye. Light bent wrong and stayed wrong. Instruments wrote numbers that didn't know how to end. The first harvester probe arrived without ceremony, a geometry that refused to be named by the shapes we teach in school. It touched the Uit dust, and the dust learned a lesson it did not survive. Energy went thin around it. Stars behind it looked tired. Varas saw it and forgot to breathe. If we had fired at Earth today, he told his flag, it would have been in the way of the ambulance. Naomi stepped into the lattice and let it step into her. The quicksilver in her eyes deepened until the room reflected in them like a small country. "Do not attempt to kill what cannot be starved," she said, more to herself than the air. "Move its appetite." She widened the archivum to a ring you could see with a telescope and not mistake for a crater rim. "We are not opening a door," she told Mai. "We are opening an option." "What does it eat?" Mai asked. "Gradients," Naomi said. "Difference turned to hunger. The first makers tried to deny difference. The harvesters taught them denial is a recipe. Mai thought of classrooms and arguments. So we feed it something it cannot metabolize." "Law," Naomi said, and smiled the tired smile of someone telling a joke to a grave. "Not statutes, constraints will lace the field with promises." She called to the Republic, not for soldiers, for witnesses. 1,000,000 small stations, in clinics, in barber shops, in mosques and libraries and corner bodgas, turned on the same broadcast. "We consent. We agree. We record." The words weren't magic. They were timing. The archivum stitched those pulses into a mesh that ran out beyond Neptune. Where the mesh lay, physics bent toward conservation, the way a budget keeps you honest about candy. The harvester probe hit the fringe and slowed, not because we pushed it, but because it was suddenly expensive to be greedy. It learned, predators do. It changed vectors, trying to drink difference where no promises had been spoken. The mesh followed because the promises kept coming. A grandmother in Oaxaca hit send. A longshoreman in Busan hit send. A teenager in Detroit hit send and then explained to his brother why he had done it. The mesh thickened. Shadow ships that had drifted to watch now had a decision to make. Vexthera's third huddled closer, unwilling to applaud. Another third joined civilian beacons, not out of love, but because eating later sounded better than starving now. "I will not pledge to their law," a captain snarled. "You're not pledging to them," his navigator said. "You're pledging to yourself. It's a receipt." Varas anchored his wing at the mesh's edge and ran ferry. Concorde med boats slid between outposts where the power bills were coming due. He hailed Naomi. "I have 30,000 technicians who know how to hum quietly. Tell us where to hum." "Hum in the gaps," Naomi said, "where promises are late." The harvester probe pressed, then slowed, then pressed again, learning enough to be dangerous. It shed pieces like a tree sends seeds on the wind. The seeds looked at the mesh and learned to slither between knots. Naomi exhaled through her nose. "Of course," she said, "a thing that eats difference will look for the spaces between agreements." "Can we close them?" Mai asked. "Not all," Naomi said, "but we can teach." She opened lines to places where the mesh was thin, not to order, to ask. "What would you promise a stranger?" she asked a room in Lagos. "What promise would you make that you would keep even if no one checked?" They wrote, "We will not lie in triage, we will not hoard water, we will argue before we strike." The archivum didn't care what the words were. It cared that they were made. The mesh fattened. In the mountain, Naomi's skin lit with lines that flickered like city grids. Mai put a hand to her own chest and felt a small truth. Watching someone become a tool is terrible and holy. "How far can you go before you can't come back?" she asked. "As far as the promise goes," Naomi said. "No further." She nodded at the seatbelt seam. "Hold me to it." The first probe hit the inner net and stopped, not crushed, not destroyed, held, like a thought caught by a word you did not expect to say aloud. It trembled, and its tremor wrote a note in our bones. "There are more," Naomi said, "and the big one is still 6 months behind." Varas cheered in the way professional soldiers cheer, by allowing himself one quiet profanity that sounded like a prayer. Vexthera watched the hold and slammed a fist into her armrest. "They will make the sky into a courtroom," she said. Mai turned to Naomi. "If we can hold it," she said, "can we move it?" "Maybe," Naomi said, "if enough people promise at once to want the same elsewhere." "Do we have enough people?" Mai asked. Naomi did not answer with numbers. She answered with a call. The message went out across Concord and beyond. We need words, not poems, not speeches, not edicts, commitments. In 1,000 languages, in jokes and hymns and curses turned gentle, the galaxy spoke aloud the small vows that make neighbors possible. The archivum listened. The mesh took the shape of a desire, not here. The probe slid, not away, aside, a little, enough to make room to breathe. The second wave came as a choir, the kind of choir that stands outside your window at midnight and sings the same note until sleep forgets your name. The harvester's main body had heard us. They were not angry. They were inevitable. They arrived as a storm of appetites tuned to harvest gradients, and every gradient in the galaxy is an invitation if no one signs for it. Naomi stood in the lattice until the lattice stood in her. She was still a woman you could imagine laughing in a kitchen, but the room now treated her like a law of motion. "Seatbelts," she said, so softly my barely heard. "All of them." Quiet Atlas reached for elsewhere, not to open a gate for us, but to offer one to them. The archivum arched and the ring's throat filled with a gentle glare. "You may feed there," Naomi told the storm, "where nothing that can keep a promise lives. The harvesters do not speak. They did, however, hesitate. Hunger knows convenience." The first ranks tilted toward the elsewhere we had set. The mesh around Saul hummed with consent, with ledgers, with the dull, decent gravity of people meaning what they say even when no one looks. The storm bent. Where it brushed the mesh, lights dimmed. Hospitals went to backup. Varas's medboats threw lines across corridors and tugged power from places that had more to places that needed it. Vex Thura's crews, the ones who had not left, found themselves asked to carry batteries. Some refused and learned what it feels like when a grandmother you do not know looks at you and says, "Coward." Others carried. The word on their ledgers read not redeemed but useful, which is the first mercy you can trust. Naomi moved the ring a quarter degree. The storm slid more. "How much can you take?" Mai whispered. "As much as I promised," Naomi said. Lines of light ran down her arms. "If you have loved anyone who worked too long at a job that mattered, you know the look that her face wore. And no more." Mai did what citizens do when leaders keep too much for too long. She called a vote, not to replace Naomi, to limit her. The ballot ran like a tide, authorized the Guardian to hold the mesh for 20 hours at a time, then mandate 12 down. The yes carried by a margin large enough to make hope a number. The archivum stamped it. Naomi's lattice dimmed a shade. She could have overridden it. The system wouldn't have let her. That was the point. "Thank you," she told the map. Varas, on a distant bridge, saluted a law he did not write. Vex Thura watched the vote total roll and found herself laughing, not kindly, not cruelly, just surprised. They make limits into victories. The storm pressed toward the elsewhere we had offered. The mesh followed with commitments shouted in kitchens and alleys and council chambers. "We will share, we will argue, we will not turn off the light before we check who is reading." The archivum fed those promises into physics like salt into soup. At last, the storm's front slid through the ring and into the pocket where nothing living could be wronged. The room got brighter by degrees. Instruments that had been writing numbers with shaking hands steadied. We did not win. We survived. Survival is the only kind of victory that can be audited. The Shadow Collective's remnants hung at the edge of watching. Vex Thura opened a circuit without encryption. "If I had broken your seatbelts," she said to Naomi, "and the storm had eaten you, I would have been right for an hour." "Some hours ruin the week," Naomi said. Vex Thura looked away first. "You'll make a league out of this," she said. "Not empire, something worse for people like me, cooperation." "We'll make homework," Mai said. "You can copy our answers or do your own." Varas's council sent a vote of thanks that sounded like a confession. Sarat, the old crystalline delegate, added a line that mattered. "The Concord recognizes that authority may flow toward those who refrain." It wasn't law yet. It was precedent. Precedent is how adults apologize. In the mountain, the lines on Naomi's skin dimmed to memory. The quicksilver in her eyes settled to flecks. She sat on the edge of the table like someone who had finished carrying a couch up 3 flights and was pretending she still had breath. Mai offered water. Naomi took it and smiled with half her face. "Seatbelt off," she said. 20 hours on, Mai said. 12 off. I checked. "Good," Naomi said. "The Republic works when it works on me." Outside, people took down cots in gymnasiums. They returned borrowed cables. They posted the final ledgers of absorbed heat, how much fire had turned into light where the light had gone. Kids in Phoenix held another hearing and wrote a new rule on a whiteboard. If we can make a thing beautiful, we still have to ask if we should. The teacher did not correct the grammar. She took a picture and sent it to the Archivum's public wall. Varas's fleet rotated home with medics asleep in chairs and pilots who had learned to wait for orders that sounded like please. Vex Thura's crews scattered to ports where grudges keep their own time. Some hung their coats in places with ombuds' offices and noticed their shoulders hurt less. Some didn't. The Republic of Light does not beg converts. It leaves the porch on. The bruise at the rim faded to a stain you could point to on a map when you told a story later. There would be more storms. There are always more. We would not always have a ring to offer. We would, if we kept our word, have each other. Mai walked out of the mountain as dawn soaked New Hampshire. She stood on granite and listened to a morning that had earned its name. "What now?" she asked, not because she needed instructions, but because we is a question you have to keep asking. Naomi came up beside her. She looked at the light hitting the leaves and did the thing good guardians do when the sirens are quiet. She looked smaller. "Now we do the boring parts," she said. "We fix roads, we argue about budgets, we teach children how to count and how to count themselves. We tell the truth even when no one is watching because someone always is." "The galaxy?" Mai asked. "They will decide whether to make promises," Naomi said. "We will hold a place for them." She reached down and touched the granite like a desk you love. "We do not rule," she said. "We remain." And because this was still Earth, and because we had not forgotten the oldest habit we built into our seat belts, we wrote it down, not as a victory, as a receipt. Power used under consent on this day in this way for these reasons, witnessed by these names. Signatures filled the page until there was barely room for the date. The heavens had stood frozen and learned to move again, not toward conquest, toward chores. It turns out the galaxy runs on chores. And every chore, when done together and on time, looks like something harvesters cannot eat. "Class," Naomi said to the morning, continues.